venga por mí. Aquí no esperan Miraflores.
They said they could see the F-35. On October 3, 2025, Venezuela's defense ministry went public with a flex. 5 U.S. F-35 Lightning II aircrafts detected near their coast. They didn't whisper it. They broadcast it. It was a warning. It was a brag. Most of all, it was a sales pitch, because the subtext was obvious. Our shield works, and China built the eyes. Then came January 3, 2026. At around 2 a.m. local time, Caracas didn't get a siren moment. No national scramble montage. No heroic intercept shot. Just silence. Then flashes. Then impacts. And then the headline that detonated reality. Nicolas Maduro was captured, along with his wife Celia Flores, and both were flown to New York to face U.S. narcotics-related charges. So forget U.S. versus Venezuela. This was a live-fire stress test for China's export prestige tech. A client state, a showroom network, put under pressure on camera. And it produced one terrifying question. If they detected stealth in October, how did the shield fail in January? Because an anti-stealth radar is only real if it can turn a blip into a launch. And on the night it mattered most, that lethal chain didn't just bend, it snapped. Now, watch the sequence. This wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a months-long campaign. Public reporting describes a rapid operation, with U.S. forces striking multiple high-value targets in the heart of Caracas and extracting Maduro and Flores. The U.S. framed it as enforcement. Others called it a sovereignty red line. By the time the sun rose over the New York skyline, the two were already being processed in a U.S. federal court. But the story isn't the courtroom. It's the transit. How do you fly into one of the most heavily defended airspaces in South America, land, extract a head of state, and fly out? And you don't lose a single airframe. Here's the answer. Not ideology, not speeches. Mechanics. The answer is the failure of the system designed for exactly this moment. Venezuela's integrated air defense system. And that failure lands hardest on the biggest hardware provider in the room, China. So let's open the case file. Because Venezuela wasn't a militia with pickup trucks and AK-47s. It was built like a layered fortress. Public reporting and defense analysis describe a stacked air defense inventory, long range, mid-range, and a radar layer marketed to see the invisible. Start with the umbrella. At the long-range level, Venezuela has been associated with Russian systems, including the S-300 VM family in reporting. Then the mid-tier, Buk M2, a system with a reputation, lethal. Public reporting has said Venezuela received around a dozen Buk M2 units. That's the muscle. But the brain? The eyes? The layer that was supposed to spot stealth? That's where China enters the frame. Meet the JY-27A, a large 3D air surveillance and early warning radar. A big, low-frequency approach China has marketed as a stealth predator. And the pitch is simple. Stealth aircraft are shaped to defeat high-frequency fire control radars. X-band. S-band, but low-frequency waves are different. They can sometimes indicate presence, even when precision tracking is harder. That's the theory. And China's messaging and displays at the Zhuhai Air Show around the JY-27 family has been anything but subtle. It's been framed as the answer to aircraft like the F-22 and F-35, hundreds of miles in the marketing universe. And in October 2025, Venezuela implied it worked. They said they saw the Americans coming. But on January 3rd, the stealth predator didn't show teeth. Here's the part most people miss. Detection is not an engagement. In air defense, the spine is the lethal chain, not the brochure, not the podium claim, the chain, and it's brutally rigid. Detect, track, identify, assign, launch, guide, assess. If you break one link, the whole weapon becomes theater. So let's walk the chain, because this is where the humiliation lives. Link 1, detect. Early warning radars can see something, a blob, a hint, a rough box in the sky. That can be enough to say something is there. That is not enough to shoot, which leads to Link 2, track. A missile needs a track, not a rumor. A high-resolution, high-refresh lock that tells the system exactly where the target is, in 3 dimensions, over time. This is where low-frequency radars can run into a brutal trade. They may help with detection cues, but they often don't provide fire control quality. The picture can be blurry, big area, low precision. A 5-mile box is not a target. And then comes link 3. Identify. Friend, foe, decoy, jammer. A stealth aircraft doesn't just hide, it manipulates. So if your network is shaky, ID becomes guesswork, and guesswork doesn't authorize launches. Which takes us to link 4, a sign. This is where systems die quietly. Because a sign means the network hands the track to a shooter. It's not magic. It's data links, command nodes, timing, rules. And here's the secret about modern seed. A top-tier force doesn't need to win every radar duel. It can break the links. It can degrade the nervous system. It can turn a network into a set of lonely islands. Analysts assess that the U.S. likely used a combination of electronic warfare and cyber attacks to degrade Venezuela's command and control nodes. So even if the JY-27A sees a blob, if the data link to the Buke M2 launcher is degraded, the launcher is just metal, expensive metal. And if the command node can't fuse tracks, you don't get assignments. You get confusion. And confusion kills the kill chain. Now we reach the moment of truth. Launch. January 3rd wasn't about did they detect. It was about did they launch. Because the public outcome is unmistakable. Maduro was extracted. The mission succeeded. And there is zero public evidence of a functioning engagement sequence that changed that outcome. No confirmed downed U.S. aircraft. No confirmed successful intercepts. No public we shot proof moment. Whatever Venezuela saw, it didn't translate into launches. And if you don't launch, you don't get the next link. The guide. Guidance is the loud part. Guidance means the system is alive, tracking, updating, correcting. Guidance means the shooter has a track and the missile is being fed. But again, no public evidence shows a guided intercept sequence occurred, which leads to the final link, the assess. Assessment is simple. Did you stop the mission? Did you deny the extraction? Did you impose a cost? On January 3rd, the assessment is brutal. The mission happened. The shield did not publicly prevent it. That's the showroom collapse. The U.S. didn't just beat the radar. They dismantled the nervous system of the entire country. Now, let's put the receipts on the table, because this story has 2 dates and 1 faceplant. Receipt A, October 2025. Venezuela publicly accused the U.S. and said 5 combat planes were detected near the coast, reported widely in international media. The implied message? We can see stealth, we can contest the sky. Receipt B, January 3rd, 2026. Maduro and Flores were captured in Caracas and transferred to the United States. So the question becomes a hammer. If the shield was real, where was the warning? Where were the launches? Where was the visible engagement loop? The stealth predator has a spectator to its own regime's collapse. And that's where this hits China. Because China's posture on this radar family has been part of an export narrative. Resistant, mobile, reliable. But resistant is not immune. And real war doesn't grade on marketing. Real war grades on outcomes. Here's the bigger problem for Beijing. Venezuela wasn't just a customer. It was a billboard, a proof state, a place to point and say, look, Chinese systems are in the field. Look, they work. And a lot of potential buyers were watching. Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia. They were told something intoxicating. Buy Chinese counter-stealth and you can blunt the U.S. advantage. But January 3rd suggests a harsher lesson. An anti-stealth radar without a resilient, hardened network isn't a shield. It's a lighthouse in a hurricane. Visible, alone. Now we pivot to the showdown. Because hardware humiliation is one thing. Geopolitical confrontation is another. For years, China has positioned itself as the alternative superpower. Their pitch? The U.S. uses its military to bully you. We give you the tools to stop them. Venezuela bought the pitch. They spent billions. They traded oil for sensors. And when the moment of truth arrived, the tools didn't work. And China's reaction was immediate. Public reporting shows Beijing condemned the capture, framed it as a sovereignty violation, and pushed the judge and policeman language. So boil it down. This rivalry becomes one headline. The U.S. demonstrates it can act. China demonstrates it can protest. And the gap between those two is the story. Because action changes reality. Protest changes the transcript. And for states shopping for protection, that difference is terrifying. If China can't deter a raid in the Western Hemisphere, what exactly are buyers purchasing? Now we get to the part with teeth. Money, oil, debt. Because in Caracas, everything flows through a pipe. Venezuela sits on the prize. 303 billion barrels of proven reserves. To put that in perspective, that's more than Saudi Arabia. That's not oil, that's leverage. But reserves aren't reality. Reality is production. And under Maduro, production collapsed. From around 3.5 million barrels per day in the 1990s, down to roughly 1.1 million barrels per day in 2025. That's a national economy running on fumes. Now here's where China enters again. Not with radar, with cash. For years, Beijing was a financial lifeline. Not charity, a deal. Oil for money. Money for influence. And in 2025, the flow was massive. China imported about 470,000 barrels per day of Venezuelan crude. Pause on that. 470,000 barrels per day. That's not symbolic. That's supply. And in the reporting frame, it's roughly about 5% of China's seaborne crude imports. So when Caracas shakes, Beijing feels it in refineries, not speeches. But it gets worse. A lot of that oil wasn't trade. It was repayment. Because Venezuela still owes China over $10 billion. Let that land. Over $10 billion. So January 3rd isn't just a raid. It's a debt event. Because if a new government takes power, those repayments can stall, renegotiated, frozen, or simply walked away from. And China has more exposure than loans. Since 2016 alone, Chinese firms have invested about $2.1 billion into Venezuela's oil sector. That's infrastructure money. Money that only makes sense if the political relationship holds. So here's the nightmare scenario for Beijing. Caracas pivots toward Washington. The contracts wobble. The repayment oil slows. The friendly port influence evaporates. And China doesn't just lose a partner. It loses a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. Because the real punchline is this. Beijing didn't just lose a friend on January 3rd. It lost someone who owed it money. Now that makes the showroom collapse permanent. Not just in public, on the balance sheet. If a new government takes over in Caracas, one that leans toward Washington, those deals are in trouble. Debt payments could stop. And if Caracas changes sides, Beijing doesn't just lose influence. They risk losing the prize. The 303 billion barrels. One night changed everything. It wasn't just the removal of a leader. It was the end of a big sales pitch. The JY-27A. The stealth predator, the whole Chinese counter-stealth promise. It was put under real pressure. And the part that matters is simple. It didn't turn watching into hitting. It didn't show a working loop when electronics got pushed hard. The US showed something brutal. You can cut off the brain of a modern air defense system before the first soldier even lands. And for China, the trouble is just starting. Because now every country that bought anti-stealth tech is looking at that January 3rd date and asking the only question that matters. Is my shield real? Or is it paper? The US-China race has moved into a new phase. It's no longer about who has the best pictures in a brochure. It's about who can get the job done when the world is watching. In the heart of Caracas, the US gave its answer. Not with words, with results. And now the next customer is watching too. When the night comes for them, does their shield launch? Or does it just watch? Bye for now.